Okay, class, let's talk about the next assignment, which is the non-rendered rendering. And first, let me just go over the timeline really quickly of where we're at. You know, the semester is kind of, believe it or not, actually winding down. Actually, I'm writing this and recording this in advance of when you're actually going to watch it. So, you know, right now you're in the week of 4.4 and 4.6. The non-rendered rendering. Following week, next week, the week of the 11th and 13th, there's a lecture on layering in Photoshop, and that is the week that the physical prints of the composition project will be due. On the following week, I'd like to have another joint class at 8 a.m. in the new business building across the pond, and we're going to just present some of your drawings from the composition project using a special business collaboration room. Again, this is an advanced media technique that we will be able to use. So, and I will inform Professor Fior that those of you in his section of construction drawings, you'll be late. Anyway, the following week, the 25th of April and 27th, there's another lecture, advanced light up and animated presentations. And that's the week that this project, the non-rendered rendering, the print of that will be due. Finally, we'll have a work session on the animations, and then with any luck, we will be able to all sit in during final exam week and watch each other's animation projects, which I think would be fun and interesting for you all to see. Okay, so non-rendered renderings are basically, my goal here is to try to do one project where you really create a sense of style to your rendering and artistry, and try, for once anyway, to get away from the sort of hyper-detailed photorealism that we all know and love, but is also you know, a very demanding and difficult type of drawing to do. And instead learn to composite drawings in Photoshop. And here's a student example of student work where, again, she just popped view types out of SketchUp, and with some fancy footwork and clever use of lighting and filters and layering, she was able to create a really fun, interesting, and artistic drawing. I actually have a whole book filled with examples of sort of creative and artistic uses of computer-aided rendering. Here's one. It actually says in the upper left that this was a 3ds Max and V-Ray, and then they used Photoshop to kind of back away from the photorealistic rendering and kind of obscure the details. Again, this makes it suggestive rather than depicting a view. And this is great when you're with a client and you don't always want them to focus on the materials, but instead on the experience. These types of drawings are also really great if your lighting design is a little bit sketchy, because again, you can come up with a kind of moody lighting effect without having to worry like, wait a sec, can I recess lights into a glass ceiling like they've done here? You know, and why is there a giant spider in the middle of this drawing anyway? Also, some of these effects are evocative of historic styles, in this case a grainy photo from the 1960s. And again, these are, you know, using rendering engines, and then they've backed away from the full-on photorealism using Photoshop. Or, you know, in this case, it is a pretty photorealistic rendering, but they've used very aggressive blurring to create kind of a dramatic vignette. So, and there's a couple of sites that you can use. The American Society of Architectural Illustrators is a great one to look at, and I'll put a couple of interesting websites on to Canvas that you can take a look at. And I'd like you to find some rendering style that you think is cool and interesting and one that you'd like to try to emulate. And our process is going to be basically take any project, and it can be one of yours. That would be nice, but it doesn't have to be. You can, by all means, export from Revit if you feel like it. But I'd prefer if you used SketchUp because there are many more view controls in SketchUp. Or you can just go and get a model from the 3D warehouse and try and render that. It's perfectly fine. But because the big thing is the technique more than the actual design. What you'll do is configure a view that you like, export different view types, and then within Photoshop, you'll do further photo manipulation, including things like adding artistic filters, and then composite that in Photoshop. And you may have a lot more material than you're actually going to use. But the idea is to try to experiment and blend and see what you can come up with. For those of you who absolutely must use a Revit project and can't stand the thought of losing your materials and having to use the dreaded paint bucket in SketchUp, you can actually export from Revit directly to SketchUp. There's an exporter. My friends over at SimLab do have an exporter that you can get that has a free, not a free, but it's a trial license that allows you a certain number of exports. And this is actually kind of handy sometimes. You need to do this. It'll ask you, they'll send you a key and you have to point the software to the key. But once you do that, then you get about, I think, 15 free exports. And it will export directly into SketchUp file format. You can also, if you don't mind using the paint bucket, I mean, it's only one space after all, you can export via DWG, and that's a lot easier. So anyway, when you import it, if you have used the exporter, sometimes you'll run into errors in the model where it'll want to fix them, and you should just let it do that. If you are running an older version of SketchUp, you might have to, when you get the exported SketchUp file, you might have to take it over to the desktops to down convert it to the correct version of SketchUp that you have on your computer, or you could just work on the desktops too. Let's talk a little bit about SketchUp. And if you have used the exporter from Revit, first of all, your file is going to be huge. So you actually might want to, before you export it from Revit, you might want to use the section box to kind of cull away some geometry. And then when you export it, all you have is what's visible with the section box active. You can also explode it many times. This sometimes makes it easier to paint things, although not always. You can also purge the model before exporting. That sometimes helps, although not always. Anyway, and then within SketchUp, we'll start working. Actually, let me just jump right into SketchUp at this point here. So here's my SketchUp model. Now, I'm not going to bother exporting from Revit. I'm just going to go find a nice blank model here. And if you haven't used SketchUp in a while, you can call up the Components menu, and there is a search bar, and you can type in, some search term, cool house, or mill building, or something like that. I think I saw that this one. Let's see what this one is. It looks fine for our purposes. So I'm going to download it right into my model. Because I'm just too lazy to make my own model. And what you'll see is that, let me just place the model here in SketchUp. And there's my lovely model. Now, one of the first things that I like to do is, when I'm working in SketchUp, is I like to have a much larger tool set than is just kind of the standard tool set. This is the Getting Started tool set. In Windows, you can just right-click on the empty area of the toolbar, and you can use a larger tool set, which opens up a whole lot of the tools that you don't see up over here. On Mac, I believe you go to the View menu and choose Toolbars, and then you can pick which ones you want to go. And there's a number of them that I like to have. I don't know, sections and I guess principle and layers and all these sorts of things. But for right now, we don't really need all that kind of stuff. And I'll just stick this out of the way. But one reason I like the section tool or the large tool set is it has these section and view tools that are awfully handy. So for example, if I want to see inside one of these apartments, I can click on the section tool, and if you remember your SketchUp, if it's facing down and I hold down Shift, it will force it to keep looking down. And then I can just kind of crop away the building, and let's see what's inside here. Come on, Windows. And now we can see what's inside here. Of course, the orbit tool allows you to spin around the model and see what's going on. And oh, look at that nice living room. See, there we go. I don't have to do any new work. I'll just use this model here. I don't know what that strange box is. Bed, maybe? Maybe it's a Murphy bed? I don't know. Anyway, what you can do if you want to make a perspective view, just like in Revit, there's a camera. Well, here there is the position camera, the little person, little androgynous person that we can place here and view the rest of our model. And of course, you're like probably wondering where's the rest of the model. That is a section plane that is cutting away our model. We're going to have to get rid of that just by going to the View pull-down menu and turn on or off section plane. Now, when you place the camera, it's got a little eyeball connected to it. This is actually called the same as in AutoCAD or in Revit. It's called the Look Around tool. The only trick is, of course, this is kind of a narrow field of view. We want this to be a much wider field of view. If you click the Zoom tool, and the Zoom tool, of course, allows you to zoom in and out, but it also allows you to change the field of view. You can just make this something more like an interior view by changing this to about 60 degrees is usually a pretty good degree of zoom. And again, you can zoom in and out and try and get a nice framing. In SketchUp, you can use any combination of these tools. There's Walk tool, Look Around. Any other of these tools will help you to set up your view properly. I'm just going to delete this section plane here because it's bothering me. Anyway, and then once you've got the view set and you've placed your camera, you've changed your field of view, there's one other thing that some people like to do, although not always, which is some people like to force the camera to be a two-point perspective. I don't always like the look of these drawings, but by doing that, if you go to camera and two-point perspective, it forces vertical lines to be vertical. I think there's something more, I don't know, architectural looking about that. But again, if you don't like that look, whenever you use the orbit tool, you are always really in three-point perspective. And some people like that look, or prefer that look. I go back and forth as to which ones I prefer. Anyway, now I want to save this view, and SketchUp, if you remember, has scenes. These are saved views. If I just go to the View pull-down menu and then under Animation, choose Add Scene, and I have made changes to the style here. So I'm going to save that as a new style. The style is kind of the graphical interface, and that came in with this model. So I'll create my scene. And that allows me to, if I make any changes to the model or I start fiddling around and zooming in and out, I can just click on that scene and it will zing me back inside and take me back to where I was. Now, so one of the great parts about using SketchUp is that you have access to what are called styles. And hopefully you remember that styles are these cool ways that you can change kind of the graphic look of your model. Now, by default, it uses basically a simple style, or if you've used one of the other templates, it might be a slightly different one, but you can use different ones. One that people tend to like is the Sketchy Edges one. And of course, the sketchy edges is great if you're using SketchUp, right? That's the whole point of using the program, is to get these cool different types of views. This one is a very markery kind of look. We can change each of these to try a more pencil-y kind of look. Or maybe a more of a pen kind of look. Now, each of these views, some lines may be lost, so you might have to recreate some of those lines. But you can see it's a pretty nice look to the image. Now, if I wanted to save this scene with this sketchy look to it, all I have to do is right-click on the scene and choose Add. And you might try a couple different ones just to see what works. A lot is going to depend on what kind of drawing you've got, what the view is, how many curves are. But you can certainly save any number of these. And some of the sketchy edges are really fun. There are some what are called style builder competitions where they challenge people to come up with cool styles for your drawing. And sometimes these are really neat and kind of unexpected in a lot of ways. So each of these styles is just basically a different way of looking at your model. And once again, I want you to try to think beyond just the photorealistic view and take advantage of some of these other views. So anyway, all right, so each of these scenes here that I've got saved, hopefully it will remember the different styles that are involved. And what you can do is export these views. SketchUp allows you to export pretty easily. Just go to the File, pull-down menu, and choose Export. The big thing is you have the option to do a 3D model, and this is good if you're going into some other program. A lot of people use SketchUp as kind of an interstitial program between things like Revit, which aren't really very good at rendering, and programs like V-Ray, which is very good at rendering. Anyway, what we want is a 2D graphic. And for those of you who are into using Illustrator and rendering using Illustrator, you can export this as an AutoCAD file, which can be brought into Illustrator directly, and it's a vector file, so that is actually pretty useful. However, we don't want a vector file. We want just either a JPEG file or a PDF or PNG, one of those. I'll choose PNG because I don't know why, because I like PNG. The big thing is look at the options for your view. Normally what it does is it just looks at your screen and it says, how big is your screen? What you want to do, uncheck that and make this as big as you can. 4096 pixels is as big as you're going to get in SketchUp. You can see it changes the height automatically. So either of these dimensions, the largest one is going to be 4096. You can also do anti-alias, which tends to smooth zigzaggy lines, pixelation, and that's a good thing to do. The other thing you can do is use a transparent background, and this is great again if you just like the alpha channel in Revit rendering. It's kind of just like that. It allows things where there is no model outside a window, for example, to be clear when you bring it into Photoshop. Anyway, and you just hit OK, and I'm not gonna bother to save this one. So that is basically it for SketchUp, and I have put these elements into a lecture in that I'll put on Canvas, including things like editing the style. It's perfectly possible to change the way a lot of things look in SketchUp, including section planes and whatnot. Probably not really necessary for our type of project, but you can have a lot of control. Anyway, and here's some suggestions on different things that you can try. With some of which I did, and some like fog, which you can turn on and off. They don't always work so great for interior views unless it's a really big project. So here's a project. It was a plane for Google, actually, that we did one year. And you can see there's a couple of different styles that I tried. And the goal here is to bring them into Photoshop and try to come up with an interesting kind of composite of all of them. One thing you might want to look at is using scale figures. Again, we learned that you can use scale figures from ArtVision in Photoshop, but some people don't like the photorealistic people, and especially if that's not your aesthetic. So by all means, use these SketchUp people. A word of advice, you can export this view with just the scale figures in it. You can hide the rest of the model, and that makes for a great layer in that can be manipulated within Photoshop. So this particular project, what we're going to have, the kind of the shopping list. I know we all love a shopping list. Find some image that's a cool rendering style that you like. We can't always get there because of some of the specialty software that people are using, but you can hunt around either on the sites that I give you or on Pinterest or other sites like that. Find a cool style that you'd like to emulate, or at least try to. We're also going to have, I'd also like you to look at 4 different options for perspective composition. We just did a whole exercise in composition. There is absolutely no reason that your image needs to be 1400 pixels by 900 pixels, which happens to be the resolution of your MacBook Pro. You can use any resolution you want, or any formatting that you want. I need you to explain why you're using the standard format if you're going to use it. Otherwise, pick either a very tall format or a very wide format, one which works with the view that you're going with. So try 4 different perspective views, any of your choice, and now you have a big arsenal of worm's eyes and bird's eyes and all sorts of good stuff. We're also going to have at least a dozen different layers. And these can be stylized views from SketchUp, like I just showed you, or like I'll show you next week, filtered views from Photoshop. Photoshop can modify views using filters like watercolor and blur and things like that. So try a whole bunch of different filters. Maybe you'll use them, maybe you won't. The idea is to try as many as you can. A lot of people just are sometimes unwilling to experiment. Anyway, what you will end up with is one 20-inch printed composite drawing that's a final composition, which should be mounted on foam core along with all these other images. So for your homework for next week, pick a project, whatever project you want, and find the best view, but experiment with a couple of different views, and by all means use these saved scenes so that you can go back to them and compare them. And start saving copies of the view with different styles applied. There will be no class on Monday the 4th, which actually, now that I think of it, is probably the week you'll be listening to this lecture, so oh well. But I will leave time on Tuesday to review your test strips, which I will probably be telling you soon. Anyway, and for next week, don't forget to listen to the lecture number 9, Compositing in Photoshop.